Well, I want to welcome everybody to the April 16th House Appropriations Subcommittee on Labor and Economic Opportunity, and I'd like to call the meeting to order. Mr. Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Chair Jenkins-Arno.
Here.
Representative Robinson.
Here.
Representative Van Workum.
Here.
Representative Cavett. And Representative Martis.
Here.
Madam Chair, majority of members are present. You do have a quorum.
Thank you. Rep. Van Workum moves to approve the minutes of the March 26th meeting. Thank you. There be no objections. The minutes are approved. So just want to say welcome to all of you for being here today. We are bringing back the issue of housing. I thought it would be good to take a deeper dive into that issue, and we know that that's a problem across the nation, not just in our state, and just want to look at, from the budget perspective, what we can do to help alleviate that problem and try to hopefully get some more housing for people, the right kind of housing and that sort of thing. So today, I'd like to welcome back Amy Hovey, Executive Director of the Michigan State Housing Development Authority, and look forward to your presentation. Thank you. Oh, and I just wanted to say that I had met with some people last night for dinner, and they had all kinds of good things to say about you and the work that you're doing at the department. So,
oh, good. That's a great way to start out the presentation. Thanks for taking the time, inviting me here today, and caring about housing enough to have a committee just to talk about housing and how that is impacting, I think, the lives of Michigan families and our employers equally at this point. We had a goal, the governor set a goal of 115,000 housing units to be produced over a 5-year period in our state. And here is where we are today, hitting close to 67,000. We're about halfway through that 5-year period, so we feel good about what we're doing. And just to reference where this number comes from, it is 95% of the housing permits that are pulled. Research shows that that's about the number that actually get developed, is about 95%. So that's where that number comes from. We update this monthly, and you'll see this graphic updated on our website. We're continuing to just really impact the housing market in our state. And when I say we, I don't just mean the Michigan State Housing Development Authority. I mean all the partners involved in housing throughout our states. That's the developers, the housing service providers, that's the folks that are our realtors and our mortgage originators, and everyone that is working together to help people get into housing in our state. As a result, at MSHDA, in the last fiscal year, we put out over $2.1 billion into housing. And just for a reference for that, last year, the year before that, we were at about $1.4 billion. And the year before that, we were at less than $1 billion. And when we're talking about the state contributing to housing, which is in the past really very nominal amount of money from the state, in the last couple years, the state has appropriated funds, thank you very much, to housing. We have our Housing Community Development Fund, which is about $50 million a year. Previous to that, we had some ARPA funds, some one-time funding come in. It has made a difference. Now, the state in the last year didn't appropriate $1 billion into housing, but what you did appropriate, the $50 million, really allows us to leverage additional funding to get that number up, to get more housing production. So we're really able to leverage what the state is appropriating into housing to real significance. That $2.5 billion resulted in over 12,000 housing units impacted, $157 million in wages for the construction industry, as well as almost $26 million into homeless services in our state. Home ownership is something that we really are focusing on at MSHDA over the last year and going into this year. And I wanted to say why we're doing that. We're doing that because it really helps our communities in a few ways. One, it provides a stable housing situation for our Michigan families. Over the last several years, we have seen rents skyrocket across the state. And so if your housing payment, which is usually each family's largest payment within their budget, increased by 25% or 50% over a couple of years, it really impacts how our families are operating and their ability to be successful. When we get them into home ownership, that payment is steady. It's predictable over the time that they're in that home. Over the last year, we've put in $772 million supporting over 5,000 families and getting into home ownership. And this is an area of which we continue to try to be innovative to bring down that cost. We're leveraging non-state dollars. So most of this is federally funded programs. We created a new product last year in partnership with the Federal Home Loan Bank of Indianapolis. So the first in the country for a housing finance authority to partner with the Federal Home Loan Bank to provide a mortgage product that is less than market rate. Our MSHDA rate relief mortgage right now is 5.5%. 5.5%. It's offered throughout the state of Michigan. That is considerably below the almost 2% or 7% that we're seeing if you just walk into a typical bank or mortgage company today. In addition to that, we have the MSHDA mortgage, which provides a $10,000 down payment assistance to help cover some of those closing costs as well. We started a new program just about 6 weeks ago, and this was with funds appropriated by the state last year in the fiscal year 25 budget. And that is our first generation down payment assistance to help those families who have never been home buyers themselves, but also don't have a history of home ownership in their family, to kind of break that cycle of just being renters. That is a $25,000 down payment assistance. In that program, we piloted it with $8 million. We've been going through $1 million a week. $1 million a week in that program. That's how impactful that's been throughout the state. We were asked to provide some information about what those programs look like. Mostly it's 120% and below area median income. They require a 3% down payment assistance. All of our programs, homeownership programs, require homebuyer education. We do require in-person homebuyer education for that first gen program because they don't receive that modeling from their families that have been homeowners in the past. The purchase price is really based on the federal government. That program is funded by the federal government. The IRS oversees those tax-exempt bonds that fund that program. And so we have it set at 90% of what the IRS will allow. You all passed that legislation last year, so thanks for that. The Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program is one of our longest-serving programs at MSHDA, also federally funded, provides for the development of multifamily housing throughout the state of Michigan. This program is very competitive. In our 9% LIHTC, we usually get 4 times the amount of applications for this product than we have funding for. The state appropriations of $150 million 2 years ago to fill gaps in this program really allowed this to boom over the last couple of years. This program, which I think is very important to know, has a 4% LIHTC that the federal government provides. It's not as lucrative as the 9%, so there's often gap in there. Those funds from the state government really allowed us to leverage more of those LIHTC fundings through the 4% program to get more housing developed throughout our state. It's also a highly leveraged program with private sector funding from our financial institutions. Missing middle, also very sought out, 100% funded by the state. We have been out of funds for the last year in that program. What folks loved about that is it allowed us to hit a different target market in the state. almost all federal I shouldn't say almost, all federal programs are at 80% and below area median income when it comes to the development of housing or rehabilitation of housing units. This missing middle allowed us to target up to 120%. And we knew there was demand for this because the cost of housing, if you've heard me talk about in the past, has totally outpaced the increase in our incomes. So more and more families up that income scale have been seeing housing vulnerability. This program allowed us to address that gap. Lots of folks continue to ask for this funding. We have been out of this funding. One of the other programs that you do fund, the Housing Community Development Fund, does not allow for it all to be used for 120%. That is something that we asked for last year. You'll see us come back again this year with some legislation for that. If we were able to get more flexibility in that Housing Community Development Fund, we would be able to do some missing middle housing with that as well. The Housing TIF, this was another innovative program that the state passed, so thank you for that. A few years ago, it's finally picking up some pace. We're seeing additional developers come in and utilize tax increment financing for housing that have not typically been using government programs for the development of housing. You'll see, I think it's next week, there'll be a big groundbreaking up in Traverse City where a single family housing developer, one of the largest developers in the country, is using this product in order to build homes for home ownership in our state. That is one of several projects we're going to see from this developer throughout the state of Michigan, really helping to develop homes in which Michigan families can afford to purchase. Again, targeted to families at 120% or below area median income as well. Huge leveraging of a 1-to-3 on this program. My Neighborhood is a new program that we had beginning April. This actually, I think, was in response to a comment that you had, Representative, last year with, why do we have so many programs? We took 9 MSHDA programs, wrapped them up into a single point of entry, a single program at MSHDA that's very flexible for all developers of all sizes to access. We used a blend of our housing community development funds from the state, as well as our community development block grant dollars from the federal government to be able to create a program that's in response to the regional housing partnerships across the state. Meaning, we listen to what communities want to see developed, and we provide funding to meet those goals. So all the applications funded through this program must be identified as a goal within those regional plans. We also do rental assistance and homeless services. Just as a reminder, because it's a point of pride, I think, for our state, MSHDA is the largest public housing authority in the country. We administer over 30,000 housing choice vouchers, which provide rental assistance to the most vulnerable families in our state. We prioritize families that are at a risk of homelessness. We 100% funded by the federal government. We're very proud of what we do, working very hard with our private sector landlords to make sure that folks with housing choice vouchers are able to live in communities in which they choose to live in our state. New program. I might have mentioned this before, that we have a new employer-assisted housing fund. This is also a pilot, also funded with state funds, about $10 million from the fiscal year 25 budget. This is in response to what we're hearing from employers across the state. I'm sure many of you are hearing it from businesses in your districts that they're having a hard time being able to recruit employees because there are not places for these employees to live that are affordable. We've heard this. We created an employer-assisted toolkit last year. So when businesses were asking, how do we get involved? We had a toolkit that said here are ways in which you can get involved. And now we create an incentive to help match the funds from businesses. So this $10 million new program will generate $20 million of benefit to the increase of housing units, as well as down payment assistance, rental assistance, hardship funds from employers across the state of Michigan. This is about 5 weeks since we've had this program launched. We've had 8 completed applications, somewhere around 8 million of that initial 10 million. We're looking to add some additional funding to that program. It's also in the governor's budget for an additional 25 million. We hope that you'll consider this in the budget negotiations, as we can tell that employers want to be invested in this. This is a way to leverage additional private dollars into the housing industry, but also meet the needs of employers across the state. What's next? You know I'm going to continue to ask for additional flexible dollars, whether that's passing a bill to help the Housing Community Development Fund to be more flexible, or continuing to provide additional funds for missing middle or the Employer Assisted Housing Fund. So I'm going to thank you in advance for at least considering those asks. We're also going to begin thinking about updating the statewide housing plan. As I mentioned, we're just over halfway through. It takes a long time to update these plans as we really try to focus on community engagement and hearing voices throughout the state. So we're going to begin working on that. And then we're going to continue to do our part at MSHDA to streamline our processes to access our programs and continue to work on removing barriers to both federal and state programs that are operated throughout the state for housing. I just want to remind you of a couple resources. These resources have been sent to your office over the last, I think looking at them over the last 6 months, but I want to make sure that you know that you always have access to them via our website. That's our annual report that does a little bit of a deeper dive on how our dollars are spent at MSHDA over the last year. The production goals reports, the quarterly reports from the regional housing partnerships, can be found on our website. One of the things I love about that is you can kind of go down to your specific district and find out how every single dollar MSHDA is spending is hitting your district in which area. Very useful. And then finally, the production goals report that we provide to the legislature every single year, which does a deep dive into each one of our program areas, what those goals were, how we spent those dollars, whether they were federal or state, and a lot of the specific requirements and leveraging points for those dollars. That's sent every fall to the legislators, but also can be found on our website if you need to take a look at that. You always know our office is open. Our staff is always willing to come and meet with you all one-on-one, provide any data that you may need for your district, meet with any of your constituents, as well as happy to set up a tour so you can get a firsthand look at the type of housing that our dollars are supporting and the families that it's helping. And finally, always happy to sit down and do roundtables about housing in your districts so we can get our arms around what it looks like. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. There's a lot going on in the housing area, it sounds like. So it sounds like it's good things. One of the things I wanted to ask about is the cost of building a house, like just a regular single family house. What is, the cost seems to be so high. Is it related to permits? Is it regulations? Is it the supplies that are needed to build the house? What is it that's kind of causing that price to be so high? So
it's all of the above. And quite honestly, we need to address all of the above, right? It's not a single point. So are permits expensive in the permitting process? Sometimes a burden throughout our state, depending on where you are locally. Yes, it definitely can be. We at MSHA are now working with our partners throughout the state to create a housing readiness checklist for local municipalities to kind of give them a concrete list of how they can be more friendly to the development of housing. Some of that includes zoning and permitting improvements. So there is some of that definitely going on. We hope to partner with them to help improve that. The cost of goods continue to go up. The threat of tariffs have continued to increase the cost of the supplies and materials for housing. We anticipate that will be somewhere between a 20 and 30% increase again. But even just the threat of it increases the costs, even when they're put on and taken off, which is a difficult pill to swallow because, again, our incomes aren't going up by that same amount. Labor, because we have a shortage of folks in the construction trades in our state, is not cheap. We also have regulations from the federal government with prevailing wage and whatnot too, which impacts that. It's not an impact from a wage standpoint because the wages are pretty high, whether we require prevailing wage or Davis-Bacon or not, because that's what the industry is demanding, but it's the additional reporting that goes with that will increase the cost as well. So we're kind of seeing it at all standpoints, and it needs to be addressed at all standpoints.
Yeah, thank you. And, maybe that's something that we need to look at more closely, maybe more, that's more on the policy side. But, if we can address any of those things on the, through boilerplate, I'd love to be able to do that to help bring down the cost of housing so that we're not having to finance at such high levels and that sort of thing. So, Rep. Van Workum.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation, and good to see you again. Took away some of my thunder with saying that I guess it's a good thing to hear that we're actually doing something here with our questions and streamlining the process. But also my questioning was going to be on the cost side as well. We've heard a lot of the supply side, the dollars involved, but you mentioned several other factors that are playing into the cost. I think a number of about $94,000 per unit of household is in the regulatory costs to build. That puts a lot of people just out of the market from the onset of even starting. So beyond the several programs that we have, the several bills that have been passed in the past 2 years, what are some of the things on that cost side? Because you guys are experiencing it, you see it, you know the costs associated with building a unit or a complex. What on that cost side do you see as something a legislature could help with so that we can lower the costs and make sure that more families can afford a home?
Yeah. A lot of our funds, well, the majority of our funds are federal, and so we have been working with Congress and our Michigan delegation, as well as the agencies there, to provide them with a list of some streamlining things that they can do from a federal level, because a lot of those requirements are coming from the federal government, and I think they are open to being able to help streamline that. I think from a state level, one of the things is the flexibility of funds that allows us to be innovative. We have lots of developers looking at different types of building styles to bring down the cost, whether that's the modular and or manufactured housing, whether it's the 3D printing, which is now in other states really seeing an uptick because it reduces the amount of time to develop a home, as well as the amount of labor needed on a single family home, which bring down the cost as well. Looking at making it easier for and funding local governments to be able to do the proper zoning so that we can create a more dense housing format within our state is also very helpful. It's more economically kind to have a denser housing structure within our state and making it easier on developers to go through, I think, the approval processes. Now, you don't have a lot of say over that, but there are housing legislation that is coming through that could make it easier and to incentivize local governments to be more housing friendly. So you'll see those coming through soon.
So the first part you mentioned on the federal side, is that the restrictions that they put on those federal dollars limiting your flexibility, or those regulations you are seeking at the federal side to lower the cost?
It's mostly the latter. It's mostly the latter. There's a lot of different types of reporting and studies that they require that aren't necessarily applicable to smaller project size, which really drive up the cost of developing housing with federal funds. We are doing a deeper dive with data to really show that, and the benefit of doing some of those things, that if we were able to eliminate them or right size them for the project size, would really make it easier to develop housing and drive down the cost.
So that's more on the
Federal side.
flexibility on the federal side. So I guess I'm still wondering, and you mentioned the cost of goods going up. That's certainly a component, but what I'm trying to find is and you mentioned the zoning thing as well, but there are just a lot of built-in costs to build a home that sometimes we see as excessive, right? Whether it's safety regulations or something like that. What of those regulations that are put in? I just remodeled the kitchen, right? And I have to have certain amount of electrical components in my island, right? Based off of a standard. You guys are running into this. What are some of those that you're looking at that just say, you know what, this is too much? And I get that there's the safety component and things like that, but where can we look on some of these things that are required because of statute, because of building code, because of these things that you've run into as somebody that's trying to do the low income and now the middle income middle income as well? What are those things that you just start scratching your head and saying, really? Why?
I'm going to try to stay in my place as a finance authority and not a builder. I think it's really important when the state looks at its building code, which is being discussed right now, to make sure that it makes sense and that it is most up to date with what data is suggesting is needed to provide safe, sustainable housing, because that's also important to us. The longer a house lasts, the more economical it is for our state. But I am not going to jump into the safety issues myself, as it's not my area of expertise. But I do think there are folks in our state that have data that show changes that can be made to decrease the cost of constructing housing in our state. And I would love to make sure that you all have access to that information.
Is that something that you guys are a part of and would support should it come out?
It falls through a different state agency, not through the Michigan State Development Authority.
Okay. It's just, you guys have a very large budget. You guys are very much in the conversation of the housing decisions that are made. You have a lot of taxpayer dollars. So I guess it seems that you guys are very much on the front line of trying to develop these, let alone with taxpayer dollars, that I'd say you have a very large say in some of this decision-making of how to lower the cost side of the equation. And as you know, we've had this conversation many times in committees such as this, and we spent a lot of time talking about the new tools, the new funding, the new laws and changes like that. I think there just needs to be a focus, particularly of your role and Mishta's role in the housing discussion on some of these costs associated with building.
Yeah, we try to identify where those costs are. We try to use data to compare those to costs in other states and provide that information. That is not the role of the Michigan State Housing Development Authority, as it is Laura's role to determine that. And so we try to be a conduit of information and a connector of folks that are our stakeholders with other state agencies so they can provide that information and allow the other state agencies with that expertise to make those determinations.
Okay, thank you. One of the things I just wanted to say was I was glad that you talked about sustainable housing, because I think in a lot of times when we get innovative, sometimes we get into things that are, maybe they're something that people might think are fun right now, say tiny houses, which in like several years they might say, I just can't, we can't live in a house that's this small. So, I think, and that's just one example, but, I think we need to make sure that we're thinking long-term as to maybe that's a okay thing for a quick fix, but going forward, we have to see how that would play out over time.
Yeah, no, I
So,
agree.
All right, well, thank you very much.
you.
We appreciate you coming in again today. Next up, we have, and I'll probably, I'm not sure I'll say your name right.
I've heard
Jarrett
it all. Take your best shot
Scarup.
at it.
Scorup,
Yes.
Vice President of Marketing and Communications, Mackinac Center for Public Policy. We thank you for coming in and giving us a presentation.
Thanks for having me. I love those questions, and I tackle them in the presentation. So hopefully you'll let me know if I tackle them or not. I'm Jarrett Scorup with the Mackinac Center. My father works in construction, has done some building. I have done quite a bit, mostly on the decks and roofs myself, so I'm familiar more with kind of some of the regulatory issues that are downstream from these major projects, but I do have some experience in that. I would describe the way Michigan kind of goes about housing, which many states do, which is it's the government kind of breaking your legs and then trying to hand you crutches afterwards. And so we need to get to the point where we are not breaking the legs in the first place of the private sector economy that is trying to provide this service. I'll go through quickly kind of the problem because I think we just talked about it. You might know housing's gotten pretty expensive. Actually, for rental, we've been fairly competitive at the overall numbers. We've had high inflation the last couple of years, so that is driving a lot of what people are feeling. So even if rent costs are going just along with inflation, that's still a pretty significant increase. It's more than 20% the last since COVID. But home prices are up double the rate of inflation, and this has eroded Michigan's housing advantage. Obviously, inflation, building costs, things like that affect everybody nationally. But if you go back a decade, Michigan housing costs were about 74% of the national average. It's up to 80% of the national average now. So our housing is increasing faster than the housing in other states overall. A lot of the solutions that have been going through legislatively they're expensive, they're time consuming, and overall I'd say they're minimal. So I appreciate what MISHDA is doing, but that's a very small part of the housing market. We've got 4.5 million homes in this state. So even doing 10,000, 5,000, 800, that is very small. Most of what we need is going to be done by the private sector, in the private sector, absent a lot of what we're talking about in terms of state financing. That's just a chart of house price index for Michigan. You can see, it kind of went up till those recession years, went back down, has really spiked in recent years. And then this is rental vacancy rate. So it's going back up again, which maybe the market there is starting to soften a little bit. But as that vacancy rate has gone down, and it was even going down up through COVID, that is increasing, helping drive the increase in rental prices for people. it's suggesting we don't have enough supply in that area. Rent in Metro Detroit. I bring up Metro Detroit. I'll talk about that a little bit because we talked about one topic, zoning. Zoning is particularly strict in the Metro Detroit area, one of the strictest in the nation. I think among the 50 largest metro areas, Metro Detroit is ranked 8th for the strictness of their actual zoning rules. And zoning is the big thing stopping development of housing. This chart is looking at what was talked about by Misha. So what's going on with income rates, and then what do people actually need in order to fund their housing? We're seeing this huge gap between what they can afford to put into housing, especially financing a new home versus an apartment. All right, so why are prices increasing? Interest rates, labor, material costs. We talked about them all. There's only so much the state can do about interest rates. There's only so much it can do about the cost of labor. There are some important things it can do. I'll talk a little about them, but that is, it's tough for you guys to affect what's going on with overall bank interest rates. But most of the reason here is supply and demand. So we have a lot more demand. Supply has not kept up with this. There's a lot of things. I've got asked at a presentation, wait a second, I thought we have a state where our population isn't growing a ton, then why do we need more homes? Well, one, people want different homes. Increasingly, they want larger homes or smaller homes. That kind of middle, they want much larger homes than they have right now, a lot of people. And then some do want, maybe not those micro homes that you were talking about, but homes that are smaller, they're retiring, their kids are out of the house, they want to go to smaller homes. And the market's not keeping up of building with what people want. People are increasingly buying second homes, vacation homes, maybe short-term rentals. Those things are increasing. So even if we have the same population, if that same population wants more homes, then we are seeing problems with supply. And while our population is stagnant, the actual number of households has gone up quite a bit. We have 200,000 more households than we had 10 years ago, even though actual population is pretty close to the same. So government regulation is affecting a lot of this. So we've had a significant increase in licensing every step of the build. Licensing, what we require of builders, what we require of workers, that's more difficult than it used to be. We have energy efficiency rules, we have environmental standards. Government regulation is about 30% of everything that you build, and that's not even talking about zoning regulation, which is, can I even build at all? And if I can build, how many units can I actually build? So it's a lot more if you consider that. We have things like mandatory sprinklers. That alone, that's a $20,000 a year per going onto a house, up to 1/3. And if you go back to 1980, just a few years before I was born, regulations were about 5% of what homes were then. We haven't kept up with our permits. So this is the growth in housing permits going back from 10 years ago. The rest of the country has increased their housing permits faster than Michigan has. Look at this as like a long-term thread. The governor has said a lot of good things on this that I agree with. She said build, 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 but our build, baby, build governor has not been building. Our housing unit permits under the governor's term, this is as much as we have, pretty much stagnant for those years. And obviously, we've had a lot more demand. A lot of these things that we just heard in the previous presentation, they do take some time to come in. But if you look at the market as an overall, we're just not increasing housing the way we need to. Longer view, go back to the 90s. We're at 1/3 to 1/2 what we were doing in those years. And we were seeing more growth in our population in the 90s, but not that much more. And yet we are not increasing, we are not seeing the people pulling the permits to actually build that we saw back then. So something's broken in the housing market. Let's talk about some of the solutions, and these are mostly on the legislative side. The big issue I have is we talk very little about the supply. How do we increase supply? Because that's the big thing that's going to bring down the cost of housing. So the governor talked in her State of the State address. Misha just talked about it. We want to spend $2 billion to buy, build, or fix 11,000 units. These are not typically homes or single-family homes. They're mostly apartment buildings. So, okay, like, maybe, I'm pretty skeptical of government predictions, but, maybe we hit it. So, well, let's say we do it. Let's say we spend the $2 billion. Let's say we do all 11,000 units. That's $180,000 per. So the taxpayer cost side is $180,000 per apartment complex. That's enormous. I mean, even going back 15 years to builders and saying, hey, we're going to subsidize this amount of housing. That's a really high cost. And 11,000 units, Mitch just says we need 190,000 just to kind of curb this supply problem that we're having. So we're only fixing a small percentage of the actual problem for a pretty high cost. There has been a lot of bills that somewhat relate to housing over the last couple of years, but not enough have anything to do with supply. So just quickly, proposals in the last 2 years. We've proposed allowing cities to put in place rent control. We've tried to put rent control on mobile homes, forbidding the use of criminal background checks, stopping the use of credit ratings for renters, providing taxpayer-funded legal representation against property owners, not considering where income comes from, making it tougher to evict, requiring landlords to accept renters on first-come, first-served basis, encouraging tenant units. Okay, we don't have to debate all these issues now. You guys can go debate them amongst yourself. My main point is these are the main things we've said when we've said housing policy over the last 2 years, and none of that has to do with supply. In fact, all of that will restrict supply because landlords are going to have a lot more questions on, do I want to go into this? Can I actually make things work if I have to follow all these proposed regulations? On the rent control issue alone, economist Asser Limbeck, in many cases, rent control appears to be the most efficient technique presently known to destroy a city, except for bombing. I'm glad that bill did not advance. Rent control has been a disaster. It was recently put in place about a decade ago in Argentina. It immediately led to a plummeting in the new supply of apartments there, which skyrocketed rents other than for the very lucky few who actually got rent control. We should not reinstitute rent control in Michigan unless we do want to bring back more slums and we want to harm everybody other than the select few who actually do get their rent controlled. All right, so what should we do? You asked about solutions. We had some questions about that. The governor said the rent's too damn high. We don't have enough damn housing. Our response is simple: build, baby, build. Let's go. Right idea. I think we've had the wrong plan. A lot of what we're talking about is subsidizing select developments. We've had increases in overall state spending, which helps drive inflation and interest rates to a small extent. But we have new regulations proposed on labor, builders, renters, landlords. We need to actually do things that will increase supply. Supply side reforms. All right, so I like the House bills from last year that sped up the permitting process, we need to eliminate steps in the review process. A lot of this is at the local level. Some of it is at the state level. I suggest a hard limit on when reviews must be completed. We should allow for pre-approved building plan sets that can get through the inspection process quickly. So South Bend, Indiana, that's the most significant place in the Midwest that does this. If you're a builder, you can pick from this pre-approved set. The local government says, yep, this meets our plans, and you can immediately start building. So, you have places here where it takes years to get going on building. There's a project where I live in Midland, Michigan. We're 7 years in to them talking about this one project, and we still haven't broken ground yet. That's on one project where we need no new sewer, no new water lines. We still aren't going. In South Bend, there are projects that are going within a couple of months, similar projects. The tough one, limit local zoning. So Metro Detroit is among the strictest zoning laws in the country. We should allow more multifamily homes in most places. At the very minimum, cities should not have minimum home sizes. They shouldn't have mandatory parking spots. We shouldn't have these required setback limits, these aesthetic requirements. These are not having to do with health and safety. They are strictly a local preference of people. They add tremendous cost to building, or they make it flat out illegal to build at all in certain areas. I live in Midland, Michigan. We have a Meijer there, and they had to do some updates to the building of Meijer, which has been there for decades. And the city came back to them and said, you're actually out of compliance with our zoning rules. Your parking lot is too small. It was surprising to me and everyone else in town because it's a massive parking lot and it is half filled at best. Meijer, like a lot of places, have shifted their model. They do a lot more take home, pick up, quick pickup. They want people in and out of the store more quickly. And they had to get a special use permit to even be allowed to do an update to their store because they weren't meeting these minimum parking lot. Now, if you ask me, does the local city council know or does Meijer know how much parking they need? The answer is Meijer. And if you're asking, does the local city know how much parking an apartment building needs or the apartment building complex owners? It's the apartment complex owners. There's way too many times where government is putting in place these rules that are completely unnecessary. The private market can figure it out. We had the question about the building code. Some suggestions for the building code. Require new mandates actually go through the legislature. We should limit the ability of these state departments to set new rules. We should require an actual cost-benefit analysis on the whole code. Somebody asked a question about like environmental rules. That's a good example of a way to talk about this because we get really fixated on these small rules of, well, isn't it good to just require, more insulation and better building materials? On the one hand, just in a vacuum, yes, it is. But the question for builders is a cost-benefit analysis, and the question for state lawmakers is cost-benefit. If you require a whole bunch of new environmental building codes, or every apartment complex now where you require more elevators, more staircases, things that we didn't have decades ago, on their own, that might make sense. But what you're doing is you're raising the cost so much that a lot of projects are not getting built. And when projects aren't getting built, you actually do the opposite of what you intend, which is people stay in their homes now that are less environmentally friendly than they would have if you had reasonable regulations where somebody could build and they move into one, even if it's not as strict as you actually want. Let's compare to the reality of what exists. Almost every new build is better than the alternative of what people are living in. It's better to live in a house now that's built today than one in 1950. And if you're preventing new homes from getting built, you are actually doing things that are worse for those people in terms of safety and environmental friendliness. Looking at staircase regulations, energy efficiency mandates, let's look at the code as a whole. Even if you do something where you're talking about what you're going to fund MSHDA with, and MSHDA is going into these local governments and funding projects, why don't you attach a requirement for local governments to reevaluate their zoning code if they want to be eligible for this money? Encourage them to do something on the supply side. Even if you don't actually want to mandate something, you can still encourage it. Supply side reforms work. Minneapolis, technically they have a split city council. It's split between Democrats and socialists, but they have a city council that is very much on the left. They significantly they essentially eliminated single-family zoning across the city. They are reaping the rewards of this. Their rent has been in real money going down, and it is much more competitive with other comparable cities in the Midwest. We look at this. Hit back button. You scroll out on this a little bit. I like to look at California and Texas. California spends a lot of time and effort breaking the legs of their builders and then coming back in and trying to hand them crutches. That is, they have enormous regulatory obstacles in the way of people actually building. Huge permitting process reviews that take forever, and very strict environmental reviews laws, very strict requirements preventing changes to single-family zoning. But then they spend mass subsidies trying to subsidize homelessness and missing middle and low-income housing more than anyone. But the result is that is not enough to make up for the regulatory problems that they have. And so if you look at Texas, which has a much more friendly regulatory environment, they are building way faster than California is. Their housing costs are much less. And even at the homelessness population, because we know that homelessness is associated with housing costs. You know, there are mental health issues. There are things with shelters, but for the most part, it's just people that cannot afford housing. So if you want to affect that issue, you want to do what Texas does, make it easier to build housing that helps everybody move, rather than California make it very expensive and then try to offer all these services later. Across the board, Texas prices much lower. Percentage of houses in Texas of under 100,000, 20% compared to 6% in California. All that missing middle housing, much more likely to get a house for $200,000 in that range than Texas and California. California is increasingly where a majority of their houses are over $500,000. And that is almost all, because of regulatory reasons. Other states have passed statewide zoning code. California has begun tackling this. I talked about Minneapolis and Montana, full Republican legislature, House and Senate in Montana, Republican governor. They passed a code that required speeding up of permitting, limited the ability to have your entire town single-family zoning. Most cities in Montana now have to at least allow multifamily home to an extent across most of their towns, and that increased supply pretty tremendously. That's it. Happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you very much. A lot of good information, a lot of helpful suggestions for what we need to do to straighten up the state and get things moving here as far as funding or as far as building goes. So just a question. I know you said that Detroit is where a lot of the zoning problems are, but also the rural area. I come from the rural area, and I think one of the biggest concerns is that we're going to gobble up agricultural land and that sort of thing. You know, what is a solution to that? I know that we're working on some legislation now. I think we're going to take it up this week about allowing the what do you call it, the splits to be a few more to every parcel.
Yeah.
So is that something that, but I think there might be some concern as far as getting utilities out there and that sort of thing. So just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes. So rural areas often escape the scrutiny because they have more land, so it's easier. But what you end up doing is, you know, you build the city or that town, and then you start adding subdivisions, taking up farmland around it. If, you know, there's always going to be people that want large homes with big lots, and I think the market can provide for that, and they can work out the rate. But what you don't want is where the government in the city area, where most of these rural areas, most of the town are only zoned for single-family homes. They say you have to have only a single-family home, and the difference between a single-family home or even just a duplex, just a home that looks like a single-family home, but it is actually two homes, that is illegal in most of our cities, whether rural, suburban, or urban. And so we could, even just by a quick tweak in zoning, allows twice as many homes as we have now. Now, if people want to live out in the country or build a subdivision in the country, God bless them, they should be allowed to do that. And, you know, but what we don't want is where government is essentially forcing that to happen because they're not looking at the restrictions that they do have around in the city and in the town area. We don't want to encourage development that wouldn't or this sprawl that would happen unless people really want that to happen.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate you coming in and talking to us about this important issue for the state. So there be no further business before the subcommittee. This meeting is adjourned.